This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Tonight's conversation is all about trouble. So, trouble, what is it? Why do we need it? How do we work with it? The what is it part is pretty simple. It's the mean stuff we do to our characters to keep the story interesting. Shall we expand on that? Talk about what trouble is a little bit or how we use it?
What's that quote about who was it? It said it was a Robert McKee or someone. He said, you got to put them up the tree and then throw stones at them and then set fire to the tree.
I don't know that quote.
Yeah, I'll find it. It's a good one though. It's just to remember, if you're struggling in a scene, then make them run up a tree, then throw rocks at them, and then set fire to the tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's always from the fry pan to the fire. So you just have to keep asking yourself, how is this going to get worse for my character? What can make this tougher? Mm-hmm.
The decisions they make can't make them happier. These decisions have to make them suffer more, constantly more suffering. Even if it's not always the physical suffering, just things going on around them, or overwhelm, or frustration, or anger, or things not turning out the way that they want them to turn out. It's just that constant compounding of things.
Right. Well, okay. Yeah, I know. I was going to say that too. I was going to say, I think I hear a theme here. Frustration, overwhelm. Weren't we just talking about that? Well, but let's break that down a little bit more, because we do want our characters to have moments of light and joy in the story. We don't want the story to be a total drag for the readers, and we don't want it to be hopeless for our characters. So let's say that your hero gets to kiss the princess. Then what? Well, the princess gets kidnapped, So you give us that hope. You throw us the dog bone or whatever, but then you've got to come and escalate the trouble. And by doing that, by combining the hope with the trouble, you actually raise the stakes for the character and the reader. Because by giving the character what he wants, then, we've got that sense of reward and satisfaction. And it's harder to have it and lose it than to never have it at all, than to just keep slogging along,
Right. And it gives your character a sense of competence too, so that they're like, okay, I took on that challenge, I accomplished this, and then, there's another challenge, but I know I can do it. I'm just going to go for it, rather than if you're constantly being beaten down, then your character's not going to want to, they're just going to, at some point, they're going to give up. They're going to say, not worth it anymore. But like you said, if you give them that little bit of that glimmer of hope, or that they've achieved one goal, but here's another goal on the horizon that it may feel insurmountable 2 goals ago, but now that they've accomplished this and that, then they feel like they are equipped to do the next thing. Gives them a good ladder, and it ties in obviously with the character arc, but
yes.
That way they have that constantly building upon, even as the troubles multiply, they themselves are getting better and better, or changing in ways to accomplish what the trouble is putting in front of them.
Right, absolutely.
That's a really nice observation. I like the idea that, because we often think about, this character's got to have an arc, but you could reverse that and say, what arc is this trouble creating? And how can I manufacture the trouble in the way that's going to propel the character's arc through? I like that idea, as opposed to just propel the plot. Because I tend to write plot driven, and although I like characters, I definitely outline plot wise. But it's a good idea to kind of think, okay, well, in this plot, the trouble that's occurring, I know full well because I've just outlined it. But how does that affect the character and their arc? And if they have a positive arc or a negative arc or whatever.
Right.
How does it affect them, as opposed to just being something they have to overcome?
Definitely. And character arcs, people often think of them just in terms of the emotional or the intangible lessons that the character learns, like the life lessons. But you have to also think of the tangible things. How is my character a different person at the end of this story? So if your character needs to learn certain skills and develop a certain prowess to make it through this plot, that is part of the character arc. That's growth as well, you know?
True. True. So, yeah, as Kathryn said, they can become gradually more and more competent at things. I suppose something like the Hunger Games is a good example of that, where, you know, Katniss is kind of thrown in, but by the end of the series gets pretty, you know, she's a bit of a ninja anyway at the start with the whole bow and arrow
Her
thing.
bow and arrow.
You know, but she's a serious weapon by the end.
Right. Well, any apprentice story is a great example of that, including the Hunger Games. You know, if you look at like martial arts, Kung Fu Panda and the Karate Kid, and even Star Wars with the Jedi Knights, where they do have the master and they are the apprentice, their development as a human being, the coming of age, maturation part of it, runs parallel to the physical challenges that they face as they go through their training to become a skilled fighter.
So how do you determine how much trouble to put them in? Because we say, okay, out of the fry pan into the fire, but if you do that in, you know, chapter 1, then you set yourself up for some real challenges throughout the book. You know, I've got to find a bigger fry pan and a bigger fire.
Right. Well, and that's true. You do need to keep escalating things. Trouble must escalate. That's why the plot arc looks like a ramp. It's Freytag's pyramid. It's not a plateau. So, you know, your little guy apprentice needs little trouble. And as things escalate, you're saving the big fight for the climax when he meets the big bad, his nemesis, because if he met the nemesis in Act 1, he'd be dead and you wouldn't have a story.
That's right.
You know?
But if there was no trouble, then there wouldn't be a story.
Right. You need the inciting incident to get the character on this journey, and then you need a continual source of motivation to keep the character struggling with the challenges, be they personal, internal, emotional challenges, or physical strain and endurance, like with the apprentice learning a skill, or conflict with antagonists, various antagonists, you know. But all of that has to build up to the big climax, the big fry pan.
Yeah. So does the trouble then always have to be relevant to the goal they're pursuing?
Yes. Because it's all part of the same plot.
I suppose what I'm asking there also is, you know, I suppose that is relevant. I was thinking, you know, a character, you know, she has to get out of the house in a hurry for some reason to meet someone, and then misplaces the car key. So the trouble is sort of not specific to, like, you don't have to think, oh, what can I, you know, have this person that they're meeting suddenly not show up or something. It doesn't have to be like that. It could just be that they end up, you know, copping a speeding fine or something on the way because, you know, something happened. They misplaced their keys. So the trouble is in line with the story flow, but isn't necessarily directly related to the goal specifically. Well, whereas if you did it heavy-handed, then that person, sorry, interrupting again, the person that this person's going to meet suddenly rings up and says, "Oh, I can't do it now." That's a sort of heavy-handed way to increase the trouble. But you could do it by just, if they're normally a really organized person, this is the one time that they, you know, it drives them nuts because they lost their keys or something.
Well, the trouble is any sort of obstacle that comes between your character and her goal. So let's say in this chapter in Act 1, she needs to get to a job interview and, you know, she's barely on time, and then she's a little bit late, and then she gets stopped by the police for a traffic ticket. And then she's late to the interview. So now that goal, she's just had to get through a progression of obstacles to reach the goal, which is get to the job interview. And then she gets there and maybe she's, the interviewer is running late, so she's just in the nick of time. Ooh, I'm saved, huge relief. But then she's so flustered from the traffic ticket that she really sucks at the interview. So you've got layers of trouble there, from the very mundane, like running a little bit late, to the very stressful, like getting pulled over by the cops, to the intangible emotional of just being flustered. And that job interview is just one step on the way to whatever becomes that climax. So they're all related to your plot arc, your subplots, which are the relationships that create complications in the character's life that add to the trouble in the main plot, and then also your character's emotional growth. So we've got sort of 3 types of trouble we can layer into any scene, and it can be very small. It can even be laughable trouble. Like you're going out on a date and you're having a really bad hair day, So, or you rip the seam in your pants on the way to the date and there's no time to go home and change. So that's trouble that affects the outcome of this plot point, that date, but it's humorous instead of traumatic for the reader anyway.
I hate when that happens. I
know.
I was ripping my pants and I'm going out on dates. It's awful.
We should talk about that.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's specific trouble of ripping a pants.
That could be in the bloopers section.
Yes,
with the speeding ticket. Even if, let's say, that she gets the speeding ticket, but she gets to the interview and she gets the job, that speeding ticket better have a court date that then interferes with the major meeting that then she has to choose between paying the fine and going to court. It doesn't always necessarily have to be leading to the exact next thing, but that trouble has to escalate something somewhere in the book. Otherwise, it's just meaningless. I always like trying to guess where the author is trying to take this trouble when they kind of leave it. Like, hey, we resolved that. Yeah, she got a speeding ticket, but everything was fine. It's like, when's that going to come back around to bite her? Because otherwise, you just put something in there that doesn't mean anything. So even if you don't pay it off in the next scene or the next chapter, there does have to be a reason that trouble occurred somewhere down the line in the plot or in the series of events.
Right. That's a really good point. So that payoff is about the relevance. So don't just throw stuff into your story for the sake of throwing stuff into your story. You've got to work it to make it relevant to the rest of the arc. So maybe the ticket itself doesn't do anything else, any further damage, but she's got a lead foot and she gets pulled over later and it just happens to be the same cop. And then there's something with that cop being a minor character, some sort of relationship thing, or, that leads to new trouble because he knows her. He knows, she can't sweet talk him this time or whatever. So yeah, bringing the trouble, the source of trouble back around is good and useful, but I wouldn't say you have to do it every single time for every single little obstacle, be artful with your trouble. Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? Storyworks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. Check out storyworksfiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level.
Did you ever watch Dharma and Greg?
Many years ago. Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember that show. Yeah.
There's one episode that really sticks in my mind about, it's a really good humorous example of trouble where they go away on a sort of romantic date together. This is Dharma and Greg, and he's really straight-laced. He's a lawyer, and she's the new agey sort of everything is cool kind of character. It's a really clever show, and by the Chuck Lorre, yes, Chuck Lorre. So he does all the other big ones, comedy stuff. Anyway, knows his writing stuff. So they're on this holiday and they go into the golf shop, and Greg's a keen golfer, so he's looking for something. And there's another guy in there, and he starts chatting to him. This guy's got a really strong, I guess, Southern accent, and he says, "Hey, y'all seen this 9-9 and a 9-9?" And Greg's going, "Oh no, I love the 9-9." And he starts taking the mickey out of him, but the guy doesn't realise because he's putting off this great accent. And afterwards, Dharma berates him and says, "That's really mean. You shouldn't treat people like that. That's just not a nice thing to do." And they have a bit of an argument about it, and then it goes away. Anyway, this episode continues. They go back to work, and he's introduced to either a new boss or a judge in a case that he's trying, and guess who it is? This guy,
the golfer.
And so he has to present the whole case with a Southern accent. It's like, yeah, there you go, karma, dude.
Right.
So it's a good example of a tiny bit of what seemed like frivolous trouble being great setup, and it's kind of unexpected because after you've been watching the show for a while that there's always a point to these things.
Right.
But you just don't know how it's about. But clever use of trouble.
Right. Well, that's a great setup for a twist. And then the twist becomes the trouble. Like the only repercussion from playing with the guy's accent is that his wife scolds him a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. But then, here's the twist and the escalation. And the real trouble is that now, as a professional, he can get burned.
My wife and I have never forgotten it either. Occasionally, what number episode was that? As 9. That was as a 9 episode. So we take the mickey out of the American Southern accent, but it's made it memorable.
Mm-hmm.
So your trouble can be quite memorable if it's finessed, I guess. So you don't, as you say, you don't just throw it at them for no reason at all.
Right. Well, yeah. Let's bring it back around to that. So if that bit had ended with Dharma scolding Greg about, mocking the guy's accent, what would that have done for the audience? It would have been a very minor note in the whole of the show. It would have been, who cares? You could throw it away, right? It's just Greg being Greg and Dharma being Dharma, and who cares?
Yep.
But when you add that twist, when you work it so that you get the payoff, you plant the seed and then you bring it to bloom, that resolution, that's when that kind of thing becomes brilliant in a story.
Yeah, and I mean, all credit to TV people for doing that in such a short period. But I think in a book, as writers, we have real license because of the complications that you can introduce, and it's tricky to manage them all without inadvertently leaving open loops. You need to have lots of conflict and trouble. You throw it all in, and then you get a review that says never found out what happened to the dwarf that came in and stabbed the guy in the bar. Oh yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah, this is why revision is so important. I always, when I read my manuscripts, I make notes in, now I'm using Scrivener's, little notepad in the sidebar to make notes for each chapter of those things that I need to go, this is an open loop. Does this play out? Where does this come up next? Is it develop it or cut it is always the choice.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So should there ever be, I know I'm talking a lot, should there ever be a scene without trouble?
Yeah, there should be sometimes, because your chapter arcs mimic the arc of the entire book. And so Act 1 is, think of your chapter in 3 scenes, just like we can think of a book in 3 acts. So scene 1 is going to be your resolution of the previous chapter's climax, the downbeat or breathing kind of rest period for the characters and the reader, as well as the setup, the introductions of what's to come. Scene 2 is that rising action. It's the body of the chapter. And scene 3 is the climactic moment with that payoff, which can be in action or in emotion. Now, of course, if you've got an entire chapter that's in one location with one set of characters with one time frame, all of that movement can take place in one scene, but it's really useful to still think of your chapter as mimicking the entire plot arc with having that rest beat, set up, resolution of what came before, rising action, and climax. So that first scene, your rest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also you can get pretty clever as well about the way you split up chapters. So your scene might end on a cliffhanger just prior to the climactic moment at the end of the chapter, although as an author you know that your scene is spanning 2 chapters. It's eating into the start of the next one, just to keep people not putting a book down at the end of a chapter, saying, oh yeah, that's resolved, I can have a little sleep now. No, I want them to miss their bus stop, stay up all night reading, all of that kind of thing.
Right. So your hook at the end of that chapter, is the climactic moment, and the opening of the next chapter can be a continuation of that previous scene, but it's the resolution of that hook. It's the resolution of the climax because we see the next action. Have you ever watched a TV series you really like and that ends with great hooks at each episode? Like I was just watching Sneaky Pete on Amazon, and they've got great hooks at the end. And an episode would end and I'd be like, oh, now I have to start the next one right away because it was such a good hook. And I start the next one, and like 90 seconds into it, okay, that was resolved. And we're moving into the rest of the story, So even though the next episode opened with a continuation of the previous action, it just let me know, okay, the guy's hand was not cut off, and now we're moving on. Okay, well, I could have guessed that, but it was such a good dramatic climax at the end of the previous episode that I wanted to see it played out. So we're getting into the art of hooks here.
Well, yeah, but the trouble is a big part of that, though, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So, you can't, if you sort of end up with the ending of a scene where everything just fades away into something nice, and that's okay every now and then if you want, if it's been really fast paced and the reader's got to have some rest. But with today's binge consumption, there is an expectation in genre literature anyway, that the binge watching that you get on the Netflix and on Amazon is translated to the commercial success of, say, series in some of the big genres, and even romance, where they're not strictly speaking it's series, but more, say, a serial of Happy Ever Afters. I mean, I don't read romance, and I don't understand why you'd want to read the same story over and over. But I'm probably doing exactly the same in sci-fi. I'm probably reading the same story over and over and over. So it's just a matter of what floats your boat, and the idea that the trouble is something you can leave. There's the difference between a cliffhanger that doesn't resolve an overall story arc and a cliffhanger that's just a minor one. There's an open loop for trouble that needs to be resolved. That's what you're saying, I think, isn't it? In terms of the sneaky.
Yeah. Well, I distinguish between cliffhangers and hooks. So a cliffhanger is that thing that is never resolved. So the entire book ends and the reader is not satisfied because something major in the story, typically the main plot, was not resolved. So the reader must go get the next installment to find out what happened. That's a cliffhanger. But a hook is something that you're going to resolve quickly. It's a promise that this is going to be continued. And so you move easily into the next thing, and it's still satisfying. It's exciting. So a hook is exciting, and if you want a hook between books, then you resolve the main plot, don't leave a cliffhanger, but you use your subplots, those character relationships and the main character's emotional stuff to entice the reader into the next book. So, but yeah, Trouble is all about escalation and leading us up to those climactic moments, which then excite the reader, but they're followed by that downbeat of resolution and rest so that we can move into a new phase, a new movement of the plot arc. Kathryn, I feel like we've done so much talking here. Would you like to finish off our conversation with any deep thoughts?
Give me some trouble. No, I think one of the things we kind of glossed over, but that you were mentioning earlier, Alida, was the fact that there's different kinds of trouble where there's kind of the things that happen that complicate the moment, and then there's the things that happen that complicate the overall plot. So you can have little things that happen that just make whatever scene they're in harder, but that don't necessarily have to contribute to the overall big overarching problem that's happening. And then there's the trouble that rolls and rolls and rolls and becomes a mighty avalanche by the time that your character has to reach that climax. So you can incorporate those little things that just are the pebbles that stick in your character's shoe versus the rocks that they have to climb over in order to reach their goal.
Right. And I think we should mention that it's okay to have trouble or a source of trouble leave a story, but if it's significant to your main character, there should be echoes of it throughout. Like, I'm prepping a book right now that's historical, and I've got a woman who befriends the wife and daughter, but the husband hates her, so she's a source of conflict in the home, but then this woman moves out of town. So that source of conflict leaves, but her influence on the protagonist who's narrating stays for the rest of the book because she reflects on what she learned from this relationship, how this, older woman influenced her, and so on and so forth. So sometimes we need that source of trouble to disappear, but don't just drop it off the page. Keep it sort of resonating with the main character, provided it's, it's significant.
Exactly.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this episode of the StoryWorks Roundtable. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.